will be a lunch provided there and here, so nice, also just another nice benefit going on. Okay, and if you are going, meet at the police station. Also, there is a round table today with our speaker, so 4 to 5 p.m. in the bridge. And who is our speaker? Our speaker is Davin Cardenas. He was a student here at Sonoma State, so nothing like you, people. Graduated from the Hutchins program. And he was co-chair of the Meta Student Club when he was here at Sonoma State. Awesome, right? He began organizing day laborers after he graduated from here at the Brayton Day Labor Center. He can talk about that a little bit too. So that's how we know him, and he's currently the lead organizer of North Bay Organizing Project. So he can tell you more about what the North Bay Organizing Project is. I wanted to put the Facebook page up there, but the computer is not working properly. But they do have a Facebook page, so later, not now, look that up. Okay, and why did we ask him to come here? Because he knows a lot about getting people organized so they can work together to create change. And we're hoping that he can give you some ideas for how to approach all those issues and problems that you're researching and thinking about talking about. So let's give Mr. Cardenas a warm welcome.
Okay, so thank you for having me. The diva in me wanted a podium, but we couldn't find the podium. So then I asked if we can't have the podium, then could we at least open the curtains and I'll run out. And Kiara shot that idea down too. But part of that is I also don't want to feel like a talk show host or a TED talker or something. So again, my name is Davin Cardenas, and I'm the lead organizer with the North Bay Organizing Project. We are a community organization here in Sonoma County. We organize institutions. So we bring churches, unions, student groups, environmental groups together. Anywhere people are already organized and they share a common value, we try to unite those institutions so that we have more power. So my job on this earth probably is to accumulate as much power as possible so that we can transform society. And I say that very willingly, that I want to amass a lot of power. And not just myself, but the people around me. Because we consider power to be a neutral concept, right? Power, as defined by Webster, whoever Webster was, defined it as the ability to act, right? The ability to act, plain and simple. It's a neutral concept, and it can be used for terrible evil, and it can be used for wonderful good, if it's in the hands of the right people. My contention often is that people with good values, with good hearts, maybe some of you in the crowd today, we have good values and good hearts, but we're scared of power, and we're cowardly when it actually becomes the power, having the ability to act. In the public realm, for me, it's not about having money. I don't want to demonize money. I would like to have money, but I don't plan to die a rich man or with a lot of wealth accumulated. In the public sector, to have power, to influence policy, to influence social constructs, you have to either organize people or organize money. And those who have both organized well have the most power. On the night of the election of Obama and Romney, on November 3rd, 4th, 2012, whatever date it was, politics aside, Obama had more money and more people organized in this country, and that's why he's president, right? So what we're talking about here is when we have institutions that come together and unite, we're trying to organize people. I don't have the luxury of large amounts of wealth. I have to organize money. I have to create a budget for my staff and for my organization. But we have to be very intentional about organizing people in the public realm to actually influence change on issues that affect them. Because I'm not in the business of doing anything for anybody, right? But rather, if people feel an issue, are united by an issue, they have to have the tools by which to act, to start developing campaigns that actually get them to the goals they want to assume, whether that's minimizing deportations in Sonoma County, whether that's winning free bus passes for college students, which is a current reality right now, but we worked on that. We had to fight for that. It wasn't easy to win free bus passes for college students, and we want to make that permanent, and we want high school students to have the same right. But we had to fight for that. We had to develop campaigns. So my power, my ability to act is done in relationship to others. It's not wielding power over, but it's actually a set of relationships that I'm willing to actually put into practice. I'm not into networking for the sake of networking. I find it a waste of time often. I rather want to build relationships that go somewhere, right? That's the art of leadership, is building relationships that go somewhere. It's not just the sake of knowing people for the sake of knowing people. People get caught up in networking as a lifestyle, and I find it meaningless unless it's willing to go somewhere. So the institutions that pay into the North Bay Organizing Project, they pay dues, and they share a set of values, and they define their issues. I'll get a little bit into those issues in a minute, but I just wanted to maybe start with a little overview. Was anybody present yesterday here on campus with the parents of the 43 disappeared students in Mexico? Anybody attend that talk? Daniel did. Oof. Okay, so I know the topic here, what I assume you've been reading, I don't know that you've all been reading, but human rights abuses in different countries and potentially their effects here in the North. And so on your campus yesterday were, in my opinion, in the public political sector of Mexico, were the most important people right now. Were the absolute most important voices in the political context of Mexico were on your campus yesterday. I had the privilege of eating breakfast with them today, and I say that casually, like as if it was intimate. But there was probably about 60 of us at the Day Labor Center in Grayton, and they came and they broke bread. I'm sorry. Anybody know? Anybody know about the disappeared students in Mexico? Would anybody like to say a few words about that? Mm-hmm. Right. 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 And so these parents are saying, you know what? They haven't found any remains. Our children are still alive, right? But these are rural schools. The students were part of a university for rural students, the sons and daughters of farm workers in rural Mexico. If you're the son or a daughter of a campesino, a farm worker in Mexico, you have the right to this free education to become teachers, to go back to these rural areas and teach. And it's actually a radical education, right? So these students, one of the speakers today was saying they were disappeared because, one, they're poor and indigenous. Two, they're radical, right? These are radical thinkers. These are socially minded teachers. And three, they're educated. That's a death sentence for people in Mexico. Not only are you poor and indigenous, not only are you developing radical thought and you're willing to give back to your community, but you're getting educated. Death sentence, right? So these 43 students were disappeared, and their parents are doing a caravan throughout the U.S. right now. They were here on campus, and it was packed, right? It was packed, and I was really proud to see that. Last night, they were at the Carpenters Hall in Santa Rosa, packed with people. This morning with the Day Labor Center in Grayton, packed with people. And the beauty of it is that they're seeing their own reflection. I shouldn't be getting emotional, I'm sorry. That our consciousness as immigrants in the United States is also beginning to develop because we're seeing ourselves reflected in these people, in their stories. Their job is to tell the story of their students, of their sons and daughters that are missing. And my job this morning was to actually tell the story of the Day Labor Center out in Grayton. Anybody know Grayton, West Sonoma County? Anybody been out there? Few people? Okay, a couple of people. Well, this is it's a rural town in Sonoma County. Traditionally, it's been a kind of a biker town. It's been a bar town. It's been a working class town where I know I have friends who before the 90s, mid 90s, they said like we'd only go into Grayton. If I was going to go into Grayton, I was going to go with like 3 of my brothers because there was a good chance we're going to get in a fight, right? It was like a bar town, right? There was bars and burgers. One of our friends, Miguel, he tells a story. His dad used to go into the Mexican restaurant and leave him in the truck with a big old pistol on his lap. And his dad would go in and gamble and then come out and they'd go home. But Grayton is this town in West Sonoma County. We've established a day labor center there. But the story I told this morning was that the families were there. They were eating breakfast. We just wanted to serve them. We wanted to give them food because they've been on a caravan, and we just wanted to break bread with them. So we welcomed them, and I was telling the story of how we founded the Day Labor Center in Grayton. And I said there was it's a result of the fusion of 2 cultures or circumstances. And I say fusion, but I think more so it's a confusion, right? It's a confusion of 2 circumstances that took place in the mid-90s here in the United States, and kind of Grayton was a microcosm of that. So would anybody know what happened significantly between Mexico, the U.S., and Canada in 1994? Anybody know what happened? It was a very important treaty that was signed. Anybody know? Yes, right. So NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement, right? NAFTA. Very key because if you don't understand NAFTA, we have no background for the push of immigration that happened like literally the day it was signed. Literally the day it was signed, the numbers of immigrants coming to the U.S. shot up like crazy. I mean, and we can get all Aztec spiritual and say, well, it's the prophecy of the people coming back to take their stolen lands, etc. And I can probably do a whole narrative around Aztec prophecy, which is ridiculous. It'd be baloney. Because what really happened was on January 1st, 1994, a free trade agreement was signed. The same day, the Zapatistas, an indigenous group in Mexico, they rose up in arms. They said, this is a death sentence for us. We're going to get kicked off our land, right? So what NAFTA does is it knocks down borders for trade. Right? It erected borders for people, but it knocked down borders for trade. So for instance, in the United States, everything's corn-based, right? Corn syrup, corn productions, corn chips, everything is corn-based. We have a corn-based economy to a large extent here in the U.S., and our government subsidizes our corn growers, right? So in Idaho, in the Midwest, they're growing corn like crazy, being subsidized by our government. And often that's like GMO corn, right? It's been injected with I call it like Arnold Schwarzenegger corn, right? It's like all injected with all types of pesticides that makes it resistant to pesticides, and it grows big and it's all crazy. And we produce so much corn that we have an excess. There's a whole pile of corn sitting there that we need something to do with. And so what do we do with that? Well, now we flood the Mexican market with that corn. Right? Before, you'd have to pay a tariff to get your product into Mexico. Free trade knocks down the border, and now you flood the Mexican market with subsidized North American product. Now, corn is like the essence of Mexican blood, life, and culture, right? It runs in our veins, right? That's the basis of our society. It's the basis of civilization. Corn, straight up, right? And farm workers in the South, in Chiapas, where I said they rose up, in Oaxaca, and Michoacan, and all over Mexico, but especially the South, it's been a corn-based economy for centuries, right? But now, NAFTA, this subsidized corn actually floods the Mexican market. So now there's cheaper corn coming from the north, so the local corn on a local marketplace can't compete with this corn that's flooding the market because it's bigger, it's resistant to pesticides, and it's cheap. It's cheap. So what do people have to do? You know, you have to make a decision. Either you fight, which is it can be suicidal to say you're going to stay and fight for your land. You go to the cities, right? You move to the cities. You go to Mexico City. You go to larger urban areas, which are chaotic in themselves. Or you come to the north, right, to look for a better life up here and the ability to get your family ahead, right? So I just point that out because it's not simple as just saying, like, why are people coming here and all this other stuff we hear in the news a lot, and there's a whole narrative about immigrants and immigration in the U.S., but there are serious political structures that actually create immigration, the need to immigrate, and the need for people to actually find something better with their lives because they can't sustain themselves with the current economic structure that's imposed on them. And it's an imposition because democracy in the U.S. and in Mexico are very light terms. You know, if we want to talk about democracy on a real level, we have the illusion of democracy in both these countries, right? So in 1994, back to my story, I deviated, right? But Grayton, all of a sudden you have you've always had day laborers there, but you have a huge influx of workers coming into Grayton, this tiny town in West Sonoma County. At the same time, the town gets gentrified, right? So it gets bought up. All those bars and burgers and chaos, or not chaos, but the organized chaos that was there, all of a sudden becomes luxury homes, luxury businesses. Now you can get a hamburger for $15 down there right now, right? But it's like there's $1 million homes. So you have this confusion of cultures, right? Now you have the day laborers who have historically been there. Their numbers have gone up. Now you have a wealthier Anglo population coming in, buying up the property, buying up homes, and they're all meeting on a street corner in downtown Grayton, California, Sonoma County. If you haven't been there, check it out, and check out the Day Labor Center. So that spurred the need to organize because we have people coming in looking for work, and we have people coming in, moving in. We're not going to fight on a street corner. We're going to organize. So my job coming out of school, of Sonoma State, I actually started as a student. We start to do English classes with day laborers while we were part of MECHA. I was part of a Chicano student organization here on campus. And we started doing outreach. And when I graduated, that turned into my first job, which was to be the organizer of the day laborers in Grayton, California. And so I literally spent 3 years of my life on a street corner with, 100 disgruntled men who were looking for work. And women, too, because women started looking for work. But we were able to dignify the hiring process, dignify the wages they earned, and dignify their ability to find work, train for work, and have more health resources on a street corner. Because if you know what day laborers are, or if you've ever seen them, or know how the economy works, basically somebody might pull up, 8 guys want to get a job, which means they're competing for the same 6-hour job, and their wages go down because everybody's undercutting each other. But when we're organized, we try to make the process easier for the employer and dignified for the worker so that the wages are set before they get in. If they're not paid at the end of the day, like tends to happen, we can actually go after the employer. But it created a whole a stronger labor pool, a dignified market for both sides, and our ability to recruit jobs, train for jobs, etc. And now for the last 6 years, 7 years, we're in a day labor center. It's a beautiful, small, portable building. And the workers have classes. We do political education. We set wages. There's a whole domestic worker element to it. So there's women workers training themselves, setting their own wages. And hopefully we're raising the living standard of everybody in Sonoma County. Because when people earn more, they spend more. That goes into all our local economy. That goes into all our tax base. And so our job there was to actually organize because it's not good enough for us to simply analyze the circumstances of immigration, say, well, that's terrible, people get run off their land, immigrants coming, this is hard, et cetera, but what are we going to do about it, right? We can't philosophize about change or just analyze the circumstances. The job of students is to understand reality and then figure out how to change it, right? If we simply get stuck in our heads, which is the easy thing to do, we're never going to change anything. And if this was a philosophical movement that I participate in, we'd already have the utopia, because everybody loves to philosophize and think about change and verbalize change, but the actual doing, the action, the practice of organizing is actually much more difficult. So my job is to actually organize people, like we said, into processes that can strengthen their own self-interest, right? We act off of our self-interest, not just out of solidarity for other people, but when I organize, I have a direct self-interest in my own development and in my own power to organize. I'm not just doing this out of solidarity for families of the 43 missing students. Though I have that in my heart, I actually have a self-interest in organizing with them and with other people to have some more dignity in Sonoma County, right? So the Day Labor Center is and Danielle is actually on the board right now of the Day Labor Center with me. I'm not a staff there anymore, but I'm on the board. And I think we have one of the strongest worker centers in the country, potentially. Definitely the most beautiful, but it's participatory. We have the best wages, and it's a dignified process for people to look for work. They're not just out on the corner exposed to the elements, but they had to organize themselves into a union of poor people to actually defend their wages, defend their rights, and not get exploited by employers. So that was our response to not only, like I said, NAFTA, these international impositions on working people, because a lot of Americans lost their jobs to NAFTA as well, because all our car industry, our automobile industry, they also crossed the border down to Mexico, and we lost a lot of jobs because of NAFTA, these free trade agreements that are killing both sides. They hurt working people, essentially, right? There are people who benefit, no doubt, but there's a lot of people who are losing out, right? And it all pushes us into the same labor pool, the same circumstances, where now we're being forced to compete with each other. So our response, again, to not only the gentrification of Grayton, but also the influx of immigration in this confusion, this conflict, was to organize a process that was dignified for both sides. And I think we've had some good success in it, right? So beyond that, the Day Labor Center is now a member of the North Bay Organizing Project, which is what I organize now. We're 20 member institutions, churches, unions, environmental groups, student groups, etc. And our job right now, we've defined our platform for this year, is to work on issues of housing, right? Issues of housing. Every political official in Sonoma County and a lot of working people are in agreement that we're in a crisis of housing, right? We have about, and maybe some of you have felt it, maybe some of you have not felt it yet, but there's probably like a 1% vacancy rate in Sonoma County, and there's no rent control, there's no protection for renters in Sonoma County. So if your landowner wants to raise the rent on you by 50%, like happened to some of our tenants, you could say, well, I'm out of here, I'm not gonna pay that. But you start looking and you literally have nowhere to go because there's only 1% of the housing is available for rent, right? So it leads people to be stuck, and not only are you stuck, but you're getting squeezed, right? So my job right now is to actually organize a coalition of individuals and institutions that can push back not only against slumlords, right, but also develop campaigns that work with public officials who, they're all saying there's a crisis. How we respond to crisis is what differentiates us. And us as a people's organization, an organization of middle-class people, working-class people, we actually have to defend our interests and push for our interests, which might mean tenant protections, which might mean rent control, which might mean just cause eviction, where a landlord needs a just cause to evict you. They can't just throw you out because they want a new tenant and for the rent to shoot up. And it's going to be more low-income housing developments in Sonoma County. This is a new language to me. This is a new frontier. And literally, we came upon this issue because we were knocking on doors in a neighborhood, and we came across a slumlord, roaches, rats, mold. All the babies in this apartment complex already had asthma by the time they were 1 year old because of the mold. Landlord unwilling to do anything, plus he's raising their rent by 50% from 1 month to the next. 50%, you know. That's devastating for a working family, right? 50%, and you got nowhere to go, nowhere to go. And our response was, let's organize. And luckily, they were all unified. It was 10 units. They said, we're down for that. They went on rent strike for 2 months, and we started organizing actions where we might have 200 people like this room, and we'll have the tenants giving testimonies about what circumstances taking place. We might have a public official, city council, that we're asking her to commit to some changes, and then we'll have an empty seat with the landlord's name on it. And if he wants, he's invited, and we hope he attends, but usually they don't attend. But at least every single one of us is aware of what his name is, right? Or her name for some instances. And often, they don't even live in Sonoma County, right? They're rich investors from San Francisco that are buying up property so they could flip it and start trying to run out poor people from Sonoma County. I have no intention of Sonoma County being a playground for the rich, right? Or this pretty green liberal economy that is only serves as a playground for green liberals, right? If we're going to have a green economy, we have to avoid Van Jones, he calls it green apartheid, right? Ecological apartheid, where only a certain sector of the liberal community or the wealthy community can benefit from the green economy, all these solar innovations, and Sonoma State's making some good strides, which are good things, but they're not good if they only benefit middle and upper class people, because the workforce needs a place to live. They want to live with dignity. If there's going to be a green boom and all these things that people are talking about, it has to benefit the people most affected by climate change, right? And the people most affected by climate change are always poor people first, globally and locally, right? Globally and locally. Those are the people on the front lines of ecology. So, so we're working on housing, and again, part of our job is to actually polarize our targets. It's to make somebody accountable to something, because we only have the power of people, of rooms filled like this, holding public officials accountable, and those who aren't accountable, we will have to know their name. We have to know what they look like. Because often, it's like the Wizard of Oz, right? If anybody ever saw the Wizard of Oz, the most critical character in the Wizard of Oz was that little dog Toto, right? Because at the end of the wizard, what he does is he pulls the veil of power. He pulls the curtain back, and then the whole wizard everybody was tripping out on was just a tiny little dude with like a bad haircut, right? And often we have to expose, too, where the centers of power are in our own cities, counties, and jurisdictions. So that was the job of these tenants, was to start going through that process. And for me, it's a liberating process. To be involved in the political realm where changes actually happen, I mean, I hate it, right? I can't stand half the people I deal with, but I love it because it's fascinating. It's where change actually takes place, and people's lives are affected based on your actions. Change also takes place based on your inaction, because our inaction gives power to the power structure, and they'll run it at will, right? They'll run it at will. So our actions can actually have impact. Our job organizing locally for power is to demonstrate that if we develop a campaign around housing, that we can win, right? That democracy, when it's done well on a very local level, can have the ability to make change circumstances. Because if we don't have that, then we are living in an absolute farcity of a democracy, and we only give it wordplay, and which means we vote and we give our power to somebody else and they go do what they want. That's not how democracy should work, right? This has to be about us and our ability to actually enact change. So that's the campaign we're involved right now for housing. But like I said, we've won bus passes for students. We've been able to drop deportations in Sonoma County. It used to be they deported 80 people a month here in Sonoma County, and that number has dwindled significantly, right? They used to impound a lot of cars with people who didn't have licenses. We put an end to that stuff. But we had to have people who were affected doing it for themselves. My job is to develop leaders and develop campaigns where people can actually have the tools to affect changes around them, right? And the other piece, the other issue we've worked on historically is education justice. For those who are teachers or thinking of becoming teachers, there's something called restorative justice practices. Santa Rosa had the 4th highest rate of suspensions and expulsions in California, right? We had more than Oakland and San Francisco combined, suspensions and expulsions, mainly young Latino males. And what we did, we saw that can't be, right? For us, those numbers don't compute with logic. So we said, well, what can we do about it? What's the solution? We're not just going to protest for the sake of protesting or being angry, but we have to provide solutions and a way for our public officials to get there. So we started looking into something called restorative justice, which is a process where if you offend somebody, if you punch somebody, if you steal their computer, whatever, you actually have to take responsibility, redeem that relationship, and then come to some logical conclusions of how you're going to work through that. Instead of just going to your house and punishing the offender, this is a more integrative, holistic way of looking at people and having them assume responsibility, righting their wrongs, and righting the relationships that they've damaged. And hopefully, if you're becoming teachers, this is going to be what our justice system, not only in the legal realm, but even in the school-based level, hopefully that's the future within 10, 15 years, is people looking at ways to minimize expulsion, suspension, because we know there's a direct tie between suspension, expulsion, and the prison pipeline, right? People's, the connection with our juvenile justice system. So for us, we were able to actually take that idea, develop a campaign, pressure public officials, win allies, and now Santa Rosa, I think they have 1 expulsion this year, right? 1 expulsion because they've implemented a new policy that is more holistic. They've hired 10 restorative justice workers throughout the school district itself to actually be implementing circles where people have to come to these agreements. And so that's had a drastic change. hopefully, it'll also, we'll have to see the statistics in a couple of years, but it'll also minimize the contact that people have with the juvenile justice system. But again, this was about people organizing, analyzing, and then practicing something to actually produce a change. And hopefully, if we're at our best, if I'm worth my salary, which I have to raise myself, but if I'm worth my salary, I'm producing change, right, in terms of public policy, in terms of material conditions in people's lives. So if you're riding the bus for free, I hope that's the case, right, because we had to fight for that. So hopefully there's a change in people's material conditions. Hopefully we've developed leaders, and I've developed myself. Hopefully I have new understandings about who I am as a man, what my political education is, and the leaders around me are going through that same process. They've learned something new through the process, right? So hopefully we've changed material conditions. Hopefully we've changed ourselves. Hopefully we've grown, because this isn't just about staying the same. And hopefully we're doing it with a whole lot more people than we were doing when we started. Because again, our only power comes from organizing people, right? It's having people willing to act together. So for me, that's what I base my criteria on. Do we have those three elements? Are we changing things and doing it with a whole lot more people, and are we deeper because of it? So that's where we're at. I think we're going to get into a question period pretty soon. I know I'm a little early on that. But are there any thoughts percolating beyond questions? Are there any thoughts percolating right now that people want to give voice to? Yeah. Right. Good. Cool. Good. I'm glad to hear that. So we're, again, we don't have we're a multicultural, multi-sector organization. So our churches might be Black Baptists, and they might be white Unitarians or white Methodists, and they might be students from the JC that are part of Mecha. They might be, again, our strength comes in numbers and in our diversity and our ability to act and have people make connections. When I talk about leadership, it's not just me being a leader or whatever and leading people. It's about people having to develop relationships that they wouldn't have formed otherwise, and having the responsibility to do that. Because if you don't have the responsibility to build the relationships, then you're probably just acting as a lone ranger, right? And we can't afford that. So we've created a vehicle that people can act together in, because again, that's the only way we can actually produce change. If I'm an individual asking for change, I have worth in the political realm if I have a lot of money. Like literally, I've sat down with lobbyists for people on the other side who are going to oppose us on housing, and they're literally saying, we're going to throw so much money at the candidates that they will not be able to take our political line, right? Because they have the ability, they have organized money. I don't hate on them for that. They've probably done a good job of organizing their money, but the odds are stacked against us. So our power comes not only in organizing people, but who we bring to the table, right? Again, the people most affected have to be the ones stepping up and building alliances with often non-traditional allies. And hopefully we've built the vehicle where people can find themselves. Even if they don't look the same, the mirror looks similar, right? When you're looking at yourself and you're in a shared struggle, there should be a mirror that you're holding up to yourself. And so the vehicle is the organization, right? They asked Nelson Mandela if his greatest accomplishment was overthrowing apartheid in South Africa. And his response was that my greatest accomplishment was building the African National Congress that overthrew apartheid, right? He saw himself as an organizer who had to build a people's organization that can overthrow a political structure. It wasn't that Mandela did it. He was part of a process. He was part of a movement, and that movement had an organization. He had to build an organization for change. So, okay, good. So we're building a committee right now here on campus of college students who are willing to do work on the bus passes, because right now it's a one-year pilot program that the county is rolling out. They want to see if it increases bus ridership, who's benefiting, etc. It's a one-year pilot. We want to make that permanent. And we not only want to make that permanent, but we also want it to get down to all youth. All youth should be riding the buses for free. We want to promote a culture of ridership, not only because we are on an absolute collision course with our natural resources, and the more CO2 emissions we have, the more climate's going to be affecting us all as it is right now. So we have to actually promote a bus culture, but also it's helping people's pocketbooks, and it's not expensive. You know, what we're talking about right now is not an expensive solution. It's actually something that can be done within the budget of the county, and there's even a roads measure coming up in June for the county to fix roads, and we've pushed that 10% of that roads measure, which is a tax to fix roads in Sonoma County, be specifically designated for bus passes for youth and college students. So we have a youth organizer. He's doing high school organizing, and he's building a team here on Sonoma State, and he's building a team in at the JC, and we want to integrate those so they could be part of the campaign pushing for the school bus passes. The other part is we have what we call a student congress. It's mainly high school students of color coming from different campuses, and they meet once a month here on campus to talk about whatever given set of issues they have on their high school campuses, and then what collective actions they could take on an issue that coincides with them all. They'll probably also be working for the bus passes campaign, and they're looking down the line at the implementation of ethnic studies in the high schools as a graduation requirement. So again, I could leave my contact information, and Kiara and Danielle also have it, and you could reach out to me, and I can connect you with that. Like I said, there's going to be a local committee here on campus fighting for those bus passes and taking part in the campaign to actually do that, and we would love to have your participation as well. Can you repeat the first part of it? To fight what? Rent raises? And would it be the same in the mission? So I think we are also living the impact of the rent increases in the mission, right? So in San Francisco, you know, you have the tech industry. It's basically a suburb right now of Google, right? San Francisco has become a suburb of Google, and so a lot of people have been displaced. They've had to go East Bay, South Bay, North Bay, and part of what we're getting is the influx of people being displaced from their own communities, whether they've lived there for generations, and now they're coming up here and they're looking for cheaper housing. First you go to Marin, then you go to Novato, and then you get pushed out. And so we're getting the influx of that. We haven't done the rent campaign in Grayton yet, right? We want to do it countywide. We're starting, and if we don't act now, we will look like the mission very soon. And so I would say more so, there's organizations that are doing beautiful work in the mission. There's people's organizations fighting back, fighting gentrification, fighting these Google buses in the mission. And so I would I'd take their lead because they have the best analysis of what's happening on the ground in San Francisco. But I know there's an organization called Just Cause, if you want to look them up. If you live in San Francisco or in the Bay, Just Cause Causa Justa is their name, and they're doing some good fights down there. I would follow their lead because they have a lot better analysis, and we're learning from them. You know, we're part of a regional network now of people, cities that are fighting these crazy. You know, the Bay Area is crazy when it comes to housing right now, and when it comes to prices, and that affects everybody in this room most likely. But we're starting that campaign right now. I can't speak. No, I definitely couldn't. I don't know enough about it. I don't know the ins and outs of that myself. I kind of asked myself the same question. And even today, you know, because we were just in the process of breaking bread, we didn't hear what the parents were asking. I think when they were on campus yesterday, they might have spoken more to what they're looking for, but right now it might just be consciousness spreading. And I know that's vague. I hate even saying that because I don't function in those terms too. I like to have steps of what we can do. But from what I understand, it is consciousness at this point. There might be petitions. I don't know. And I think that's a very, very good question. and I'm giving a very terrible answer, and I can't offer more than that right now. But I would look into the issue. I think having some knowledge of Mexico, our southern neighbor, in the political context is just makes us better people, because they're like a very important economic neighbor. They are our physical neighbor. They are our historical neighbor with a lot of tension, right? But there's so much back and forth that just having any type of basic analysis of Mexico, Mexican politics, I think regardless of what your political stance is on any issue, I think it's just important to have. Right? I think it's important to look into it and know a little bit about what's happening with our neighbors to the south. We're so intertwined. So understanding what happened to these students as a microcosm of what's happening in Mexican society right now, in this like what I call like almost a failed state right now, run by drug traffickers, and the alliance of drug traffickers with government, and how that actually benefits us, and and how we have a hand in that. It gets deep, but I think having general understanding is critical, just in us being more well-rounded individuals. So that's all I can offer right now, and I'm sorry about that. Yeah, I was kind of having this conversation yesterday, but the ability of people not to be stepped on, right? Of people not to be stepped on. So, I when I grew up in Orange County actually, and it was like a suburb too, and I felt small, right? Because everybody would make Mexican jokes, and my parents were Mexican, right? I was born here in the States, but they're from Mexico, and I would have to shut up, and I would have to listen, and I'd have to be quiet, and not, I should have punched somebody in the mouth a couple times, right? Many times. But I decided to stay quiet and internalize all that trash. And so for me, like, I want to be a dignified human being, somebody who knows how to defend themselves, who is willing to swing back when the circumstance occurs, and not just physically, but also mentally, and in terms of who we're in a relationship with. So for me, the ability to not take anybody else's bullshit that they're imposing on me is my ability to have dignity as a man, right? And as an organization, also, I don't want to be stepped on by political officials, by rich folks. I want us to be able to make righteous stands that are thought out. We don't want to just, swing at the, we're not like, Don Quixote is like a hero of mine, but we're not trying to fight whirlwinds or windmills, I'm sorry. So we want to have a dignified approach to how we as people, as working people, as middle-class people, have the dignity to not be stepped on, not be bought out by the public officials, because every day there's somebody else coming who want to make an alliance with us, but we have to have our own self-interest met if we're going to ally with anybody, regardless of their good intention. And so the political realm is a space where you can easily be manipulated. It's very easy to be manipulated in this realm. There's a lot of people who want to be our best friends because it makes them look good. And if there's nothing in it for us, then we probably won't make that alliance, because we have to defend our own dignity, which means having more people, which means having a bigger budget, and also having principled political stands when we're working on an issue. And that's as much for me as an individual as it is for my organization. We want both. I don't have the luxury of being pessimistic. So I'm not going to say it's going to shit, our society's screwed. I have hope, which again is another vague thing that I hate to even mention. But I have a deep desire that, especially in California, if we're not underwater in 20 years, that we'll be able to start a deep process here, because I think especially we're going to have a huge Latino population, and if we do right now, and if we work right amongst young students to produce dignity and this idea of love, right, this vague concept of love, which includes power, I think we can actually produce generations of people who understand how to build bridges. And I think California has the potential in 20 years to be a very special place in this country. And often what happens in California spreads to the rest of the country. So I have a lot of high hopes for this state based on population, based on people who are becoming teachers right now that are thinking of how to develop more integrative, holistic approaches to education that actually produce leaders and people who care about other people and aren't just, in it for themselves. So I think California has a lot of potential, in my opinion, to be something very special that gets at the heart of race and class relationships. That might not be the trend, and we are often bombarded by what's negative, but I think if we are futuristic and prophetic in how we're thinking about the future, we have to act very, very hard right now, and very seriously right now, to produce a generation in 10, 15 years that's going to be forward, better than us, way better than us. So I think we're going to get out in a couple seconds. Anything else? Any other questions? Cool. I'm sorry to get emotional too. That doesn't happen. I don't like to get emotional in public, so I'm sorry about that. But that's it.